heading into the presentation. You've probably seen that this meeting is being recorded, so please acknowledge. And we're rolling now. And as you can see in the chat, everyone's getting to say hello. Lovely. Lovely to see you all. Okay, let's get rolling. Okay, it's my pleasure to be presenting the DC Lab Speaker of the month of June, the Midsummer meeting. And it's a special day today because it's Turing Day in the UK. It's a bit of an unofficial day. It's not Juneteenth exactly, we're not having a holiday. But today is special because the Bank of England have noted Alan Turing's birthday by issuing a special £50 note, which is aligned to an augmented reality app in Snapchat. So something to look up. And that brings me to introducing Rob Morgan, who is calling in from across the pond, and a very early start for you, Rob. Thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
It's great to see you. And just a bit about Rob, and then he's going to present his work to you, two strands of his work, which I think will be interest to DC Lab speakers. At the end of his presentation, we'll have a live Q&A, and there may be an added bonus of some alternative places to inspect of Rob's work at the end. We'll tell you about that after the presentation. We will end sharp on 3 though. So let me tell you a little bit about Rob. He's a virtual theatre maker, which is how I know him. He wears 2 hats as a practitioner and as an academic. He's a scenographer. He designs sets for theatre. He's an art director for film. He designs theme park on James Cameron's Avatar. When he's not designing sets, he's a professor of drama at Washington University in St. Louis in Missouri. Now there are 2 Washington universities and Rob has taught at both of them, which is very confusing. But then there are 3 York universities, so we can't say anything about that. As his role as professor of drama at Washington U, he runs an undergraduate program called Beyond Boundaries, which is a futuristic, if I may say, a future-looking bachelor's program, which is multidisciplinary and is taught by academics across the board, faculties from arts and sciences, from theatre to medicine, which is extraordinary. And the aim of the training, if you like, is not to session or field, it's getting them to address the big question. And sometimes that big question hasn't been posed yet. So I'm going to hand you over to Rob with this question to you, Rob. What is your big question, and have you solved it yet?
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real treat to be with you all today. I'm fans of many of you and your work. So my big question, I think I keep asking, is what am I doing and why am I doing it? And I don't think I've answered either. I drove yesterday all the way from New Mexico to Arizona in a giant 16-foot truck pulling a 16-foot Airstream trailer behind me. And that was one of my big questions, like, why am I doing this as the Airstream trailer is fishtailing on the highway? But it's a real treat to be with you all today. So I'm joining you from Prescott, Arizona, which is on the West Coast time zone part of the year and the Mountain time zone the other part of the year. It's very confusing, but it's a treat to be with you all today. And as I said, I'm a fan of many of the work of many of you. With that in mind, I guess what I would love to do is share with you a video. Given my my sort of transitory lifestyle right now, I pre-recorded a video for you all to that highlights the things that I do, disciplinary program that Mary mentioned, to the work I do in both theater and some exhibit design, even a little bit of theme park work and things like that. But mostly it's about the sort of, I believe, what is a kind of interesting new territory that merit a more accessible realm of theater work in a virtual space. So with that, Sue, I think it might be good to maybe cue up the video if I've not left anything out, Mary.
usual story. We're good to go. So ready when you are, Sue. The backstage team.
Hi, my name is Rob Morgan. This is the pre-recorded portion of my talk. Thanks so much for being here. It's a delight to be part of this particular project and working with such talented colleagues from across the pond, as they say. I'm delighted to kind of take you through a number of different iterations of the work that I do. I'm a scenic designer by trade. I also teach that at Washington University in St. Louis, not to be confused with the University of Washington in Seattle. I used to teach there as well. And so I'm delighted to kind of tell you a little bit about my backstory as a scenic designer, or scenographer, it's more commonly called, I think, in the UK, and talk a little bit about the work that I've been doing in the virtual reality realm, because I feel like it's such an exciting new frontier for iterating designs and presenting shows in a virtual medium, kind of leapfrogging, if you will, over the normal kind of process in stage design. So I really believe in this quote right up here: some things have to be believed to be seen. I think that's kind of a nice, perhaps, thread in this particular talk I'm about to do. So let me just take you through a little bit of what I do, and we'll go from there. For starters, as I said, I'm a theatrical set designer. I've been doing this for about 25 years now. I've been lucky to work at a lot of mainly regional theaters in the U.S., all over the country, kind of pack the dog and my belongings at times and do shows all over the country. I'm going to take you through some few examples really quickly here. This is A Moon for the Misbegotten. If you look up Fail Better, there's a whole Fail Better actually recording of me talking about a terrible review I got for this particular design. It's a very evocative design. It's a Eugene O'Neill play, more traditionally done in a farmhouse, but this one was done kind of, it sort of honored the epic quality of these characters and the language of this particular play. So this was done at ACT, American Conservatory Theater in San Francisco, California, beautifully lit by a colleague of mine, Don Darnitzer. So really kind of special design for me in my career. This is another one that was done at called House of the Spirits, done at the Denver Center Theater Company. Fabulous in the round space here, pentagonal in shape, 5 sides. We had all 5 VOMs open for this one, and it was really kind of an epic play in scale and scope. This one here, this is Act 3 of Major Barbara. There's a often mentioned in George Bernard Shaw's play Major Barbara, mentioned by Andrew Undershaft, the sort of military industrial contractor, mentioned throughout the play about an aerial battleship. It's fascinating to think that in 1905, when this play was written, that even George Bernard Shaw knew that hardly had the Wright brothers flown a plane, that we would adapt planes, of course, for war. So we decided to design in a rather non-traditional way the third act of this play on board an aerial battleship that was 46 feet wide. Actors, as you can see, can walk on it, and it had aircraft landing lights on the front of it. We love blinding the audience in the theater, don't we? So there's that. This was all the way done at Cleveland Playhouse. I've done this play twice. It's an epic play about the 11 months after JFK's assassination and before LBJ, Lyndon Johnson, was officially sworn in as president in 1964. It's some of the really sort of some really important laws were passed during this particular period of time. All of the text you see on the back, that was rear projections. Keep this particular play in mind. I'm going to show that to you in virtual reality very soon. And for a number of years, I've been using SketchUp, computer modeling. This does play into the virtual reality realm. I've been using SketchUp to design shows. I've done 10 shows in 4 summers at a theater right here in St. Louis called the Muni. It stands for the Municipal Theater. It is 11,000 seats, 11,000 seats. The rear 1,500 seats are free. It is bigger, at least in terms of scale of musicals, than the Hollywood Bowl. It is 90 feet wide and 60 feet deep. That is the stage. So any amount of scenery on stage kind of dwarfs actors. This was a monstrous production of Seussical. So there's what it looked like in a SketchUp form, a computer model form, and what it looked like for real.
This is a hairspray I did on the same stage. You'll see there's a moments in this particular musical where Corny Collins does a TV show. We decided to treat a large LED screen upstage as a kind of bakelite television, 1950s black and white TV. So that's a live stream of those actors on that big screen. So even the people in the back of the theater could see. And this is one of my final shows. There was a giant production of Wizard of Oz, beautiful production. This, just to give you some sense of scale, that wall, entirely painted, by the way, by some of the most talented scenic artists, I think, in the country. Two-dimensional, 23 feet high and 85 feet wide. It's a massive, massive stage. So that's some of my theatrical set design work. I've also done some exhibit design, and I want to share a little bit of that with you because, it does sort of lead to where we're going here with SketchUp. I was lucky enough when I lived in Seattle teaching at University of Washington to do an exhibit in this space right here. It was at the time called the Experience Music Project. Now it's called the Museum of Pop Culture, but it's a Frank Gehry designed building, really fun building for this particular content. So this is an avatar getting behind the scenes of the film, the James Cameron film. I was lucky enough to meet James Cameron during the process of this. It really was sort of the behind the scenes, how the film was made, a largest artifact being an amp suit. So you get a kind of a top-down view from a SketchUp model of this. So nightly, I was burning renderings of, in this case, the audience, the theatrical audience is actually right on top of the scenery. So it was about kind of taking the audience or the patron through this particular maze of content. You'll see in the far left side there is, intentionally so, a very plain space. We wanted to really reinforce the fact that 95% of that film is computer generated. So I'll show you how we did that in a moment. So you get an example here of a SketchUp model and the final design. It was very immersive. And one reason they wanted a theatrical scenic designer to do an exhibit was they really wanted it to be immersive. They wanted to avoid what they call the museum's shuffle. They don't want people to walk the perimeter of the space and leave. So this was some amazing content I actually had very little to do with, but a company out of San Francisco called Snibby actually mounted some cameras to a projector, and we were able to allow wood sprites to emerge from the forest and land on the shadow of the people walking up. This is some content, some digital content, concept art and that type of thing. So there was a fiduciary chip in each side, and inside each of these chips, each of these cubes, you might say, you put the cube on a table, and a little pinwheel of concept art would pop out. It was really a very interesting. You could spend hours doing that. And here's that final portion, that final third. We really wanted to reinforce the fact that the film was actually filmed inside of a aircraft hangar. In fact, where Howard Hughes built the Spruce Goose, the famous Spruce Goose, was built inside this aircraft hangar in Santa Monica, California. So it really was nothing more than a very, you might say, theatrical space. It was 6-foot squares taped out and a bunch of platforms, and they told the stars of that particular film to just pretend you're on a helicopter, pretend you're on a helicopter. Everything else was added later. So we wanted to reinforce that. So what we decided to do, and again in SketchUp, design a kind of a volume, a reflective covering inside a volume with 14 cameras. And then you were able to basically hold your arms out and the cameras would find you, and then you would walk through a forest on Pandora, and you would then see yourself computer generated as either Jake or Natiri, the two stars of that film. So there's some exhibit design. I have been as well, and during COVID, I invite you to check out my website, morgansetdesign.com. There's a link there to a Google Doc with about 12 pages and counting of just lots and lots of resources. I've been kind of using that as a compendium of sorts of what people are doing, or were doing at least during COVID, in terms of how they were creative, how they were building theaters, doing shows in the backs of trailers, doing shows on Zoom, of course, and different mediums and that type of thing. So I call that theater without a theater. So moving on, I want to talk a little bit about the virtual side of what I do, and it kind of starts as you all know, kind of necessity is kind of the mother of invention. transition. Like all of us, all over the globe, I was forced to teach basically online for an entire year at Washington University in St. Louis. I almost got my schools confused again. I primarily teach courses. I teach a design and creativity course to 80 first-year students. I have 4 TAs. It's a massive course, but I love it. It's a great course. It incorporates all 4 divisions of students in that class. It's a fantastic course just about the idea of creativity, how creativity can be basically the secret sauce to anything we want to do, no matter what our discipline. And then, of course, I teach a studio class on scenic design to roughly about 14 to 16 students. So both those courses were forced online, and that's when I found some really useful tools. But the design and creativity course, I want to kind of very briefly touch on this because I think it's a bit of an innovative way to look at education. Not only is my course this fall taught, we're going to actually thankfully be in person this fall, we hope, but it's co-taught by 2 or more faculty across 2 or more divisions at WashU. So that's what constitutes what's called a Beyond Boundaries course. So you'll see there's one on climate change taught across anthropology and engineering. There's my creativity class, which I teach with a colleague from architecture. A brand new one on entrepreneurship taught by 4 faculty. One that's been around for quite some time called When I'm 64 on Aging is taught across the med school, the Brown School for Social Work, and our arts and sciences, mainly neurosciences, we're well known for at WashU. And the art of medicine taught across the art school and arts and sciences, romance languages specifically. So these are all Beyond Boundaries courses. They are only open to first-year students. They are taught by 2 or more faculty across 2 or more divisions. And quite honestly, we sometimes disagree in front of students, and that's life. We really think that's important that students get that kind of exposure. So the Beyond Boundaries program is actually a program that I direct, and it really takes its big why from something that you and I have been asked since we were kids, and it's what do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to be when you grow up? Which is kind of a bit daunting, but also I think misleading in the sense that it gives this impression that there is a linear path to life, and there certainly isn't. Basically, instead of what do you want to be when you grow up, we like to turn that on its head. We like to ask students, what problems do you want to solve? You can kind of see it right here. What problems do you want to solve? And by that, we basically want students to ask a big question, we call it, and in that big question, answer it how you would use WashU, and specifically to answer that big question across 2 or more divisions, across 2 or more schools at WashU. So in a big way, instead of picking a major, we ask students in this program to pick a question. What big question would you answer, and how would you do it at WashU? How would you use our resources, faculty, staff, students, all kinds of programs and institutes we have on campus? How would you use WashU to solve that big question? So some other sub-whys, you might call it, 85% of jobs, as we all know, in just 10 years are not even invented yet. We think that means that we need to basically develop a student who is kind of ambiguous in terms of what they want to do, but also ability to be flexible upon graduation. A lot of complex issues we never even anticipated, including COVID, came along that must be solved in an interdisciplinary way. So that's another sub-why of the program. I kind of wanted to share this with you. 27% of college graduates, current adults, kind of end up in a career related to their major. I'm a classic example of this. I'm not in a career related to my major of theater, at least when it comes to interdisciplinary research and education. And then a third sub-why, I think, is being a designer. I love graphics. Here's one that I think is what's considered a well-rounded global citizen. Someone that could be a T-shaped thinker, tell a compelling story, design for failure. I think failure is so important in the creative process. Go where there be dragons. This kind of idea that you need to kind of venture into the world and do what you need to do without knowing all the answers. None of us know all the answers. So that's a bit about the Beyond Boundaries program. I also want to share with you what I think has been kind of a mindset shift, going back to this idea of SketchUp. For most of my life, I've been interested in doing this. Basically, this is a paper model for a great Noel Coward piece called Fallen Angels. I did at Oslo Repertory Theater in Sarasota, Florida. Really beautiful, kind of like early Art Deco kind of environment. So this is nothing more than a white model, really, for the most part. And I go from that to this. This is what the show looked like when it's finished form. But now what I've incorporated into the tools for the past, I'd say easily 6 or 8 years, is SketchUp. I can actually drop an actor, I can drop a director into a space. And this one is a Diary of Anne Frank, actually, I did in Cleveland, where we surrounded the audience with barbed wire. They were trapped as much as the tenants of the annex were, and the Frank family and the other families that were there. So this is a great example of how I'm using that. So with that in mind, so what I want to talk about here is this kind of mindset shift. What I think is so interesting about this new sort of virtual reality realm is it's a new kind of pioneering way of looking at space. What is space, and how can we redefine what space is? Space online, I think, is kind of a liberating way, a democratization of sorts. And the way YouTube was a democratization of video content, being able to produce shows and play around with what space means is so interesting to a scenic designer like myself, because it again, as I alluded to earlier, it sort of leapfrogs over a stage I've never quite liked anyway on theater, and that is budgeting and figuring out how much we need in terms of materials, what we have to cut, and that type of thing. But what I'm finding so interesting, driven somewhat by the teaching I'm doing in the same mode, is what I can do. Well, if I can teach in virtual reality, can I also do shows in virtual reality? So I think this is the mindset shift I want to kind of talk to you about here. So augmented reality, just to be clear, I've been playing around with this, and specifically with a colleague from someplace called the Fawcett Lab. And a colleague in the Fawcett Lab, you might remember Steve Fawcett, who was famous for circumnavigating the globe in a hot air balloon, actually founded a center at WashU, which has been developing different technologies basically for teaching. In this case, we're looking at this GeoExplorer app. The GeoExplorer app allows you to basically, in augmented reality, show some very interesting sites from all over the world for students to see together. For example, this image here is a group of students looking at a crystal lattice structure inside the VR lab at the Fawcett Lab at WashU with some HoloLenses they're wearing. So they're all looking at the same content in 3 dimensions together. It's mind-blowing to think that we may be venturing into a world now where our traditionally two-dimensional teaching is moved into 3 dimensions. If we can have all the students looking at a 3-dimensional object at the same time, that the opportunities are limitless. Well, my colleague, Phil Skemmer in the Fawcett Lab, also allowed me to add a tab to the GeoExplorer app called Drama. And if you click on that, if you feel free to do so, you'll find some set designs of my own actually in that space. So this is a picture of my studio table, and a model of a SketchUp model actually brought right into the GeoExplorer app. So when it comes to teaching with this, I'm fascinated by the idea that my students can build a model in SketchUp, drop it into augmented reality, and on 10 different tables in 10 different cities, my students and I can look at their work right there in front of us. It's really kind of fascinating. I've also been working with Kubity a little bit as well, which is a similar type of thing where we can input SketchUp models and output an augmented reality version of those models. Some examples of what Kubity does here. I've been really having fun with that kind of augmented reality way of thinking. Now, when we're looking forward to virtual reality, I've been playing for the most part at first, actually, again, necessity is the mother of invention, Verbella. Verbella, if you don't know, is this kind of it's a conference room, you might say. It's an entire campus in virtual reality. They're the parent company for something called Frame VR. And Frame VR and the developers that work with Frame VR have been kind enough to help me work on what I need to do, and they're getting input back from me as a teacher on what I think Frame was good for. Now, Frame is a web-based. It is not a program download. So that, again, is liberating. I don't have to ask my students to download a program. I ran into all kind of trouble with that with Verbella. But Frame, while it is a bit lighter in terms of weight, there are no arms or legs for the most part on avatars in Frame, for example. It is really, really incredible the kind of spaces you can put together with that. So framevr.io is the website. I highly encourage you to kind of play around and look at it. And there's actually, this doesn't even cover all of them. They're launching different spaces all the time, but there's small galleries, large galleries. There's an atrium space. There's an outdoor outdoor theater space, which I actually have used. I'll show you that in a moment. A team suite. There's something called Zen Office now. There's a neon space, which is kind of very disco. But if you think about it, it's a virtual reality classroom. Zoom is so impersonal when it came to teaching. I missed the conversations between my students, and they missed conversations between themselves as well. But in VR, we were able to drop a model into virtual reality, into Frame, and have us all show up in the same space at the same time. And it was our virtual reality classroom. I mentioned the design and creativity class. It's a great space for welcoming students. For example, over the summer, last summer, I developed a space in Frame and invited all the students that had enrolled in the course to go check it out and go wander around. And so you can put video content, audio content, 360 spheres, and that type of thing inside of Frame. It's highly, highly interesting, I think. This is a bit of another view of that. I can introduce the TAs for the course as well. It's been fascinating to do so. This is my set design class. We used it as a virtual pinup space. So these are a couple of students presenting their work to each other in Frame. So it's really kind of fascinating to be able to do it that way. So Verbella, as I said, the parent company, is a much kind of more robust, but also program-based. It is a program download. And the future of work actually is looking very different in the future, where people can join from anywhere across the world, live anywhere they want, and basically show up in a boardroom for a typical boardroom meeting, except it's their avatar version of themselves. You can see my avatar on the left there. I didn't quite know when I first started that I needed to dress myself from the waist down, so I had some issues there, as you can see. The conference hall space is a space I subscribe to, and we actually did our orientation for Washington University and my program specifically in this conference hall space. Very, very useful tool for, again, when COVID presented the limitations, we thought, well, let's move into VR from reality. And we did so that way. And this, I think, brings to mind what is next and I think most interesting about moving forward in this realm, and why you all are such fascinating colleagues, actually. The work you're doing, Chris Follows, for example, been following a lot of his work. Gabe Baker is a developer with Frame who, like I said, has been very helpful for me in terms of moving forward and thinking, what can I do with this? I know what it is. As you know, kids are great at that. Children are very good at basically going from the traditional use of an object to what can I do with it? Think of aluminum foil, for example. Aluminum foil, we know what it's supposed to do, but a kid will find about 12 other uses for it. So here we are. We have a virtual reality space or spaces designed the way we want. How do we use them? So when it comes to that, I've been fascinated for the most part in questioning the assumptions. I love this little meme I threw together because all of my colleagues, for the most part, when it comes to meetings, and I'm sure you all are in the same boat, when it comes to Zoom, comes to a meeting, we all automatically assume it has to be on Zoom. But I think really what designers do inherently is reframe. And we reframe and question assumptions. So why is our assumption that we have to use Zoom? Why do we have to do that? So from that, I basically liked to kind of develop a way or a venue. Here's a venue, an outdoor theater venue inside of a 360 photo of my very campus. There's a beautiful building there called Brookings. This is where I could never, ever build an outdoor theater, but in virtual reality, I can drop it right in front of the most beautiful building on campus and collaborate and do kind of things together with my students. This is I spent last fall, I did what was a virtual reality theater experiment, you might say. I had two versions, just to give you some backstory. I had two versions of the 360 photo sphere. One was a daytime, as you'll see in that first photo. That's the daytime version of that building. And one was a nighttime version of that building. And I got to kind of turn the house lights down, you might say, to this outdoor theater. And I recruited a couple students who had already rehearsed a Pinter piece. It was just a short piece. And I invited all my colleagues that I could to this one night at this one time. We almost broke Frame, but we didn't, thankfully. And we saw two students do a Pinter piece. Now, again, they had no arms or no legs, and there's a lot of advancement that could happen for the most part. But this was our outdoor theater space. It worked just fine. We had a great little post-show, you might say, or post-scene talkback from my colleagues who kind of highlighted some of the advantages they saw and disadvantages that they saw during virtual reality theater, basically in a virtual reality space. If you don't know the work of Brendan Bradley, this is an American Theater article from a few years ago, and COVID and the restrictions it's provided has only kind of been an accelerant for this type of work that Brendan Bradley does. If you look up #future stages, he's been, again, democratization of tools. He's been a great asset and a great resource. Someone was on his YouTube video show, basically, as a whole YouTube page. He's very good at promoting himself, actually, and just a delightful collaborator, someone that really, really loves sharing not just the theater, but how it's done, how the sausage is made. And so I highly recommend following him on Twitter and Instagram and looking into what he does. One of the things he did was something called Onboard XR. Some of you might have attended this. It was a group of people from, again, across time zones collaborating together as actors in about 4 or 5 different spaces. And so audience members like myself, this is my view, showed up as basically we had our own little life vest on, which is how the actors could identify themselves versus the audience. I actually wore a tuxedo, and I was advised to change because there's an actor later in the show wearing a tuxedo and they didn't want confusion. So, but it was a really remarkable kind of onboard, literally onboard of ship, actually, to start with. A kind of a great way to do a theater piece. A lot of creativity went into this. And it was really fascinating to see that this is just the baby steps of what is a new future online doing virtual reality theater. So Onboard XR, it may be still available as a video, but I highly recommend that the next one of these that comes along, you really make a point of getting a ticket and going and experiencing it for yourself. It was highly interactive. This is the Future Stages stage that you can see that Brendan has put together. It is basically open source. So all you can basically download, this is in Mozilla Hubs, by the way. You can download this in Mozilla Hubs. You can use a tool called Spoke to make modifications to it, for example, to the marquees outside and that type of thing. But it's ready to go as a sort of virtual reality space using Mozilla Hubs. This is Brendan did a fantastic Sunday in the Park with George. I think it was primarily using OBS, Open Broadcasting Software, but highly recommend looking that up as well. It's a remarkable it's a one-man Sunday in the Park, which was quite good. This you might remember all the way, basically, this production about LBJ. What I have at my disposal now, I think, is this sort of library of SketchUp designs for shows that did actually happen that you can drop right into Mozilla Hubs. So there is the exact same set in Mozilla Hubs. Now some tweaking here and there for color and that type of thing, but ready to go. I can drop it into Spoke, drop it into Mozilla Hubs, and do the same show if I want in a virtual reality realm. So highly, highly exciting to think about how that might be useful moving forward. I think before I go, I also wanted to show you that I have not abandoned my roots when it comes to live theater. So I have a little bit to show you there. My department, again, when we went into lockdown, we thought, okay, we can't do any shows indoors, but that didn't say we couldn't do a show outdoors. So when taking basically this idea from a 15th century idea of a pageant wagon, I'm sure you all are sort of know a little bit about this at least, but it was simply a wagon that performances, in this case, the word of God was spread to a lot of rural towns all over Europe on a pageant wagon. It sort of was the precursor, for the most part, the testing grounds for a lot of stage effects. A lot of theater stage effects come from this century and this particular innovation. So there was the heavens, there was the traps, there was dressing rooms and things like that. It was this kind of transformer type of wagon. So with that in mind, we decided to design our own. I happened to find an old trailer that was basically used by the physics department, I believe. They used to haul a dirigible around campus with this thing, and then designed from there, literally from the wheels up, design a kind of a transformer type wagon where we could do shows. So you see a little bit of that here. This is one of those shows. This is one of those designs, should I say, and how that looked. What we ended up with was a little bit simpler. We decided it was too expensive to do a second story, so we abandoned that. But when it comes to to what we ended up doing, there's the drone footage. One of the coolest things I got to do during the pandemic was to tell a drone, a $40,000 drone, where to go. And it was so awesome. So we got some great sort of archival drone footage of our pageant wagon show. It was a great show. Students were so delighted to be doing theater in person again. Speaking across space, across a wide open field like this was both safe and exhilarating, quite honestly. So that's the remainder of my live, should I say, my homage to the live theater lover in me. But at this point, I'd love to open it up to questions.
Rob, fantastic. Amazing content. I'm going to have to watch it again just to make notes. Incredible.
Well, thank you.
We're going to take some questions. If anybody wants to post your question, please post it in the Q&A. I've got a couple of questions. Also, there's going to be an added bonus at the end of this presentation in that Rob is going to make available some links to spaces that he's set up in Frame VR. And we're going to choose one, aren't we, Rob? And Rob and I are going to jump in. We're going to give ourselves 10 minutes to run to the bathroom. But following this presentation, for a short while, Rob will be in one of his VR spaces. And if you want to jump in, you don't need anything except your laptop. Right. You don't need a VR headset. You don't need to download anything. You just click on the link and in you go. So we're getting some questions. Rob, can you see the?
Yeah, I can see. Yeah, I can see a couple of questions in both the chat and the Q&A. I'm happy to answer them. Isabel had a question about, have I seen students follow through on the questions that they identify in the Beyond Boundaries program? It's such a new program. We're only in our 3rd year of existence, but it is very exciting to see. We have, at the moment, 3 cohorts. And if you include an incoming cohort of 60 students, we started with a cohort of 30, and so they are rising juniors. Rising sophomore cohort is about 40 students, and as I said, 60 coming in. So we're gradually growing incrementally, but the questions, these big questions that students have, it's really, I think, a really interesting way to look at our higher education system has been so siloed, really as a 19th century idea. Before that, Socrates, even during that, Albert Einstein, they all leaned on this idea that they didn't care where their innovative ideas came from. They were always looking across disciplines and divisions. So I'll give you a quick example. Jenna Rogge is a student in the program who's interested primarily in helping to develop prosthetic limbs for children who are amputees. So if you think about that big question for just a moment, it incorporates child psychology, art, mechanical engineering. So she's all over the map in terms of her big question. And it's really what she wants to help people. She particularly wants to help children feel a little less alone when it comes to their disabilities. So, I mean, it's someone like that is just so inspiring. We have no graduates yet from the program, but I'm very interested to see what they do in the world. Hopefully I answered your question there, Isabel. Let me know with any of these questions. Let me know if I didn't answer them. But what kinds of VR, AR physical performances have inspired you? What areas do you see could be exciting to explore? I mean, the work that Brendan Bradley's doing and his colleagues, I keep offering my own services to Brendan. Like, hey, if you need a set designer for this virtual thing you're doing, I don't know what the hell I'm doing either, but let's figure this out together. So I've been really excited to see him and his colleagues. It's kind of a club of sorts, at least on this side of the pond, of some VR innovators doing some interesting work. Obviously, I know you all are familiar with the dream that RSC did, the Midsummer Night's Dream that they did. I thought that was profoundly exciting and interesting. So I find it, as you all probably have, and I believe I talked to Mary about this as well, given the lockdown, given COVID, given the limitations, if we think of constraint as a catalyst for creativity, that constraint of COVID has allowed at least me to join the webinars that are happening in Holland and things. It's crazy. I've met people virtually, met people on Twitter, and joined different webinars all over the world. And I didn't even bother to think about that before COVID happened. So I think the opportunities are kind of exciting to again, as I said earlier, rethink what it means, what we mean by space. And as I said, my least favorite part of the production process, design process, is okay, how much is this going to cost, and what do I have to cut, and all these like really tough questions. Like, okay, I'll cut off the thumb if I can still have the four fingers, but if I want to drop an entire castle into VR and do a show there, I can. I can sort of blend site-specific work. If you know Sleep No More, for example, a production that's very site-specific, we can do site-specific work. Onboard XR was, I think, a very interesting version of site-specific work. At one point in that performance, there were two actors who then told the audience to follow, I guess, their favorite actor. And so it reminds me a little bit of a sort of a, when you get on a plane, they tell you the spiel that you often ignore. Well, on one plane I was on, it says when there's a loss of cabin pressure, there will be a mask. Put your own mask on first before assisting others. If you're traveling with two children, pick your favorite one. So in that case, there are these two actors that are like, well, if you side with X, then go with X. If you side with Y, go with Y. And so in that way, it was a very, you wanted to play the game again. You wanted to see the show again and go with the other actor you didn't pick. It's really kind of very exciting. So hopefully I answered that question. Are there others?
No, I'm going to jump in with one of my own.
Please.
So wherever you're going where you don't need Zoom, can I come with you, please? And why do you think that educators, some of whom are on this Zoom, and practitioners in the dramatic arts, what's their resistance to using VR? Because we know there is resistance.
There is resistance, and that virtual reality experiment I showed you with the Pinter piece, I literally recruited a couple of students. I'm like, do you have a rehearsed thing that I can use? Like, do you guys mind showing up on a Wednesday night at 7 in this VR realm? And they're like, what are you talking about, Rob? I'm like, as long as there's something that you've already rehearsed, then I don't have to worry about that part. I just want you to try it in this VR realm. Well, what was great about that was I invited my acting and directing colleagues to attend, and the post-show, post-scene talkback that, as you all know, often happens in theater, was highly informative. It's all on video. I'm happy to show you, to send the YouTube link. But it was highly informative for me. A lot of my acting and directing colleagues are like, well, they have no arms and no legs. How are they gesturing? I only see one face. I think as time progresses, and Avatar is a good example here. James Cameron was very strong in recommending that we push the idea of performance capture, what he calls performance capture, which is not motion capture. It's actually thousands of dots on an actor's face. And if you've seen the film, obviously Avatar, you know that the performance, particularly the facial expressions, come through whether Jake is an avatar or not, whether he's a Na'vi character or not. So I think as we get further and further technologically with what we can do in VR, then there will be less resistance from particularly acting and directing colleagues who are like, I can't see, how do you expect me to direct an actor when I don't see the emotion? But we definitely did hear. We heard the actors in that Pinter piece. We heard their emotion, which was highly exciting, So a lot of help from Gabe Baker, actually. They were going to do that night, the night we did that VR experiment, they were planning on doing a major upgrade to the frame basically system. And they postponed it for my show, which was so sweet of them. I thought, oh, that's so nice. But,
I hear, just to explain, that Frame VR is still in beta, and
yes.
Gabe is the head developer, I think, of Frame, and they're very amenable. Because I know Chris Follis, who's also working in Frame VR, who is this side of the pond. He's working at UAL. And they've made a relationship with Gabe, who has been very amenable to suggestions. It's a good time to get in, don't you think?
It definitely is. And we've done some sort of capacity tests as well. Like he wants to break it so that he can learn from what went wrong. And so, he's excited about the work I'm doing in education and theater inside of Frame. He's like, oh, those are great uses. Let's keep going.
So we think it's going to be free forever, don't we, Frame? Or it's going to have a premium model maybe, so it will be easily accessible.
I believe it's definitely free up to a certain capacity level. Now I have requested via Gabe some expansions to those, because I'm like, I got a class of 35 students and my cap is 20. Can you give me a little more? And he does.
You get it.
So yeah, I think there will be a sort of for massive like conference type style things. If we ever get there, will definitely be a fee for that. But at the moment, it's totally free.
And why do you think educators can benefit from using Frame VR or any kind of web VR?
I thought, and again, it was about in the comparison, hosting my classes in Zoom. Students, for the most part, as you all know, turn their camera off. They're definitely muted. And there was no interchange. There was no, I can see when a student's engaged when they're asleep in a real world. But on Frame, they were immediately energized by this technology, because they were chit-chatting like they do when they enter a normal classroom. They were talking to each other. They were talking to me. There was a conversation happening. And it was as weird as it was for them, it was also, I thought, a step towards the old classroom experience we had in a real classroom.
Great. So. Rob, I'm going to move to our next and final section. Yes. So if you have questions for Rob, rather than make them now, we're going to give you an opportunity to put them in Frame VR, if you'd like to join us there. So we are shortly, our backstage creative team of Sue Jackson and Ella Eyre are standing by to post some links to Rob's work in Frame VR into, I think they're going to put it into the chat.
Sure.
And Rob, we're going to take a 10-minute break from the end of this Zoom, and then you and I are going to jump into one of your frames. Can you tell us which one it is?
You bet. There's about 4 links I think I've shared. One is for the design and creativity class I mentioned. It's sort of an orientation space for that class. And then there's one for Beyond Boundaries, which a lot of my prospective student talks. I do an information session for Beyond Boundaries program every week, actually. I have one next week, in fact. That's one of them. I think Mittens Bernie, if you know Bernie Sanders from the inauguration, there's a 2-dimensional version of him just sitting there. So he's in the Beyond Boundaries space. There's a Drama 311M, which is just the code for the course. Drama 311M space is in what's called Zen Office space, and it has a lot of what I think are great little private volumes. So really good for students. I do a lot of group work with my students. That class of 80 creativity students, for example, we break them up every 2 weeks into projects, having them drop themselves into that space and go to a private volume to talk, like they would in real life. That's the third one. And then the one I think we'll go to, because it is theater related, that's kind of my bread and butter, is called Theater Test. It's actually the space that we used for that Pinter piece that I mentioned. So that's should be on the steps of Brookings building at Washington University in St. Louis. So that's the one we'll go to, but we'll share, I believe, all 4 of those.
Okay.
There was one more question from Isabel, unless you wanted to.
No, fire away.
Do you think standard audiences are ready for nonlinear immersive theater? Are immersive theaters bringing new sorts of audiences? I think the RSC production is a great example of that. I mean, attracting literally thousands of people to a production that they see online and experience it, I guess, in that realm as lightning bugs in VR if they want. Was it lightning bugs or some sort of bug?
Yes.
Yeah, I called that, having my avatar background, I called that RSC production Puck on Pandora. I felt it was very kind of like, I had critiques of it, of course, but I thought, oh, wow, this is very kind of Pandoran landscape. But yes, so I would recommend, before we let you go, that your bandwidth can be very taxed if you have the Zoom call open at the same time as you go to Frame. So it is, I guess, wise at this point, given Mary's approval here, to close out the Zoom call and join us entirely in Frame.
Yeah, I'll just say as a postscript, if you're coming into Frame now, or I think Sue was going to post all your links. So we are now going in with a 10-minute break. We're going to go into it's called Theatre Test. So you'll see the link, but if you go to framevr.io/theatre test, Rob and I will be there on the hour, whatever the hour is, wherever you are. I will just say, if you've got a pair of these, that's ideal for Frame. Otherwise, you do tend to get a bit of feedback. And if you are going into Frame VR for the first time, it's useful to us if you identify yourself. Don't just come in as anonymous, but actually put a name on and set up an avatar if you've got time. But it's just another forum where we can have a chat. We will appear as avatars, but you'll recognize us, I think.
We can be whatever age we wish. We can be much younger than we already are.
Yeah, who needs when I'm 64? I'm thinking ahead of that.
Yes.
But I can be any age I like. It's great. But you don't have to go in now. Only drop in now if you want to chat to Rob. The frames are open, aren't they, Rob? For any time?
That's an important point to make. These are open 24/7. So my students want to collaborate on a group project at 2 a.m, have at it. I'm not awake, but you can be, and drop into the frame space anytime you wish.
Great. So if you're watching this on catch up, we won't be there. However, if you're watching this live in 10 minutes time on the hour, wherever you are, for a short while, Rob and I will be in framevr.io/theatre test. And I'd just like to close out this Zoom by saying thanks a lot, Rob. It's been just amazing. Please come again, and all our thanks go with you, particularly for getting up so early in the morning, but just giving us an amazing presentation. Thank you so much.
It was a great honor. Yeah, great honor to be with you all.
Thanks a lot, and goodbye for now.